You ever feel like you're getting whiplash trying to follow the news about the Democratic Party?
Oh, definitely.
One minute it sounds like, they're poised for this major comeback. The next you're reading headlines about internal squabbles. It can be tough to get a clear picture.
It really can.
So that's what we're tackling today. We're diving into a recent discussion that, well, pulls no punches about the current state of the Democrats.
But not just that, right?
No, exactly. We're also going to unpack some pretty significant actions taken by Donald Trump targeting specific law firms.
Okay.
We've got a source here that lays out some very strong opinions on these topics. And just to be clear up front, our goal is just to walk you through those arguments.
Right. Present the different perspectives that are in the source material.
Yeah, highlight what's being said, but without us adding our own layer of opinion on top. Especially with politically charged stuff like this, we just report what the source says.
Got it. So where do we start? That Democratic Party picture seems pretty messy.
It really does. And what immediately jumps out from this source is just how divergent the views are on where the party stands right now.
Yeah, you mentioned that whiplash feeling. It's kind of like that within the source itself.
Exactly. So on one hand, you've got someone like Hakeem Jeffries projecting confidence, saying things like the Republican Party is, on the run, on the defensive.
Okay, that's the optimistic take.
But then, almost in the next breath, the source brings up this totally contrasting sentiment, this feeling that Democrats are actually facing huge challenges, maybe getting their butts kicked and lacking clear direction.
It really makes you wonder if they're all looking at the same political map. Is there even a shared understanding within the party?
That's the core question, isn't it? It's the stark difference between we're winning and, well, we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
The source we're looking at even uses the word hilarious, which is pretty strong to describe this perceived disarray, this inability to get everyone on the same page.
And you see that playing out, or at least the perception is you see it playing out in the House.
For sure. The source points out that even with a really slim majority, the Republicans seem, well, remarkably unified in pushing their agenda through.
Often just rolling right over Democratic efforts.
Yeah, the source uses that term steamroll, which really gives you this image of maybe Democratic ineffectiveness in pushing back.
And that perception of Republican unity, even if it's maybe more fragile under the surface, it definitely makes any Democratic disunity look even worse by comparison.
Right. And then the source brings in someone like Alyssa Slotkin. She's described as having a lot of talent.
Okay.
And she directly challenges this idea that everything's okay. She apparently said the party is in a free fall.
Wow, free fall. That's a pretty harsh assessment from someone inside the party.
It is. And she kind of hits on what the source suggests is a core issue, this lack of a clear, identifiable leader.
A leadership vacuum.
Yeah, almost. It's like, who's actually steering the ship? The names that get mentioned in the source, Schumer, maybe Hillary Clinton, even Kamala Harris, they all seem to have question marks around them for different reasons according to this perspective.
Right. No single figure who everyone universally points to as the leader.
And then there are these other mentions, like someone named Bashar. The source notes his political name comes from family ties, but he doesn't seem to be a major national figure.
Okay, maybe less known.
And then, of course, there's Gavin Newsom, who definitely gets people talking, both for and against him,
He's certainly a prominent figure, but maybe polarizing.
Could be. But the point the source seems to make is that without that clear, unifying leader, it's hard to get a consistent message out, hard to implement a strategy.
Which might explain some of the other observations in the source, like about the anti-Trump efforts.
Exactly. The source calls some of it amateurish, things like, holding up signs or the mention of pink suits.
Oh.
And the underlying question being raised is, are these things really working? Are they actually countering the opposition effectively, or do they just come across as, well, maybe a bit performative or out of touch?
That's a fair question to raise based on those descriptions.
Which then brings us to Bernie Sanders. This is interesting.
Okay, what about him?
The source highlights that he's been out there campaigning, drawing what it calls Trump rally numbers, big crowds in places like Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan.
Wow, okay. So real enthusiasm on the ground.
Apparently so. And his stated reason for doing it, according to the source, isn't about him running for anything. It's, quote, to save your damn political party.
Oof, that's blunt.
Very blunt. Basically saying he's stepping up because he doesn't see anyone else doing it effectively.
That's quite a statement about the perceived leadership gap.
It is. And what's also interesting, the source notes this apparent disconnect. You have this grassroots energy for
Yeah,
Sanders.
these big crowds.
Right. But he doesn't seem to get much attention or support from the more established parts of the party structure. The source suggests an almost dismissive attitude.
So they might be overlooking something there, a real connection with voters that isn't being leveraged by the party itself.
That's the implication, yeah. It makes you wonder. Then the source pivots to some moments it calls cringe.
Uh-oh. Like what?
Well, attempts at social media engagement that maybe didn't land. There's a mention of an AOC comment, "Choose your fighter, Aka." Apparently, it was meant to be a viral thing online.
Okay, I vaguely remember something like that. Didn't quite work.
Didn't quite work for many, according to this take. And there's a mention of another Democrat who appeared maybe intoxicated on social media.
So dear.
And also the act of kneeling on the floor of Congress. These are all sort of lumped together as examples of strategies that aren't really connecting, maybe even alienating people.
So, contributing to this overall feeling the source describes, what was it?
The Democrats have lost their mind. That's the phrase used. A sense of a party kind of flailing, maybe caught up in what the source calls Trump hysteria, leading to unusual anxieties or missteps.
So back to the leadership vacuum then.
Yeah. In that context, the source kind of suggests Bernie Sanders becomes a de facto leader almost by default. Because he's out there, he's active, he's getting a response.
But the fact that it's him, an 83-year-old independent who isn't formal party leadership.
Exactly. The source implies that needing him to step in like this really underscores a potential weakness in the current setup.
Okay. Is it all negative in this assessment, though?
Not entirely. There's also mention of a golden opportunity.
Oh, what's that?
Well, the source points to reports that the NRCC, the Republican House campaign arm, was discouraging town halls, and maybe the House Speaker advised against them too.
Okay, so Republicans potentially pulling back from direct voter engagement in that format.
Right. And the source sees this as an opening for Democrats. Go out, engage directly, maybe even in districts that aren't traditional strongholds.
Reach voters outside their usual base.
Yeah, the source calls it a divide and conquer approach. Go talk to people Republicans might be ignoring. Seems like a strategic path, right?
It definitely sounds like an opportunity, yeah.
Yeah.
If Republicans aren't showing up in certain places.
No one else could. But then the source ends this section with a pretty memorable analogy.
What's that?
It compares the Democrats to the Black Knight from Monty Python.
Oh, the "'tis but a scratch" guy.
Exactly. It's just a flesh wound,
Yeah.
even as he's losing limbs.
Huh. Okay, I see the point.
Yeah, it really encapsulates this feeling, according to the source, that the party might be underestimating just how serious the situation is, how big the challenges are, kind of oblivious.
That's a powerful image to leave you with on that topic.
Definitely. Okay, so let's shift gears now. Big topic change.
All right.
The source also digs into these actions by Donald Trump, specifically targeting certain law firms.
Yes, I saw that mentioned.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Well, apparently there have been executive orders aimed at firms that helped Jack Smith, or helped the DNC back in 2016. Retaliation seems to be the framing.
Okay. Targeting perceived political opponents via their legal representation. What are the alleged consequences?
They're pretty serious, according to the source. Things like potentially becoming ineligible for government contracts or jobs.
Wow.
And even having existing federal grants pulled back. Revoked.
That could be financially crippling for some firms or projects.
You'd think so. And there's another layer, too, a directive about law firms involved in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives,
What about them?
potentially restricting their access to federal government buildings.
So making it harder for them to even physically do their work if it involves federal facilities?
Seems to be the idea. It definitely feels like an escalation in targeting groups seen as, adversaries.
Okay, so that's the action. What's the perspective on this within the source material?
It's strong.
Yeah.
Particularly regarding one firm mentioned by name, Covington Burling.
Okay, what's the view on them?
The sentiment reported is very negative. I love it. Is actually quoted regarding them being targeted. They're described as representing corrupt corporations, including in the opioid industry.
So a moral judgment on their clientele.
Very much so. The source even brings up Eric Holder's connection to the firm after his time as Attorney General.
Right.
And specifically references the controversy around the HSBC money laundering case during his tenure. The source notes allegations of laundering drug cartel money, but HSBC wasn't prosecuted, just got a big fine.
Okay, so weaving in past grievances and controversies associated with the firm and people connected to it.
Exactly. It builds this picture of a firm that, in this view, deserves this kind of pushback because of who they've represented and their past associations. The feeling is almost like justified payback.
Right, I see that perspective. But that's obviously a really complex area, right? The role of lawyers.
Absolutely. And the source does bring in the critical counterargument
Which is,
that lawyers, regardless of who their client is, play this absolutely fundamental role in protecting First Amendment rights for everyone.
the principle of access to legal representation?
Yes. The idea that everyone, no matter how unpopular or even, how bad their alleged actions are, deserves access to legal counsel and the court system. It's a bedrock principle.
Including access to federal courthouses, which that DEI directive might impact.
Precisely. So the concern raised is, are these actions by Trump an attempt to stifle dissent, to intimidate these firms?
Making them maybe less likely to take on controversial clients or cases in the future.
Could be. Is it government overreach trying to silence and scare people? That's the worry expressed.
That's a serious concern regarding the rule of law and constitutional rights.
But then that initial strong reaction we heard pushes back again.
How so?
By arguing, look, lawyers choose who they represent. They aren't like public defenders obligated to take every case that walks in the door.
True, private firms generally have discretion.
So the argument goes, if a firm chooses to represent, say, a hypothetical pharma company accused of killing women, isn't there a moral choice involved there? Don't they bear some responsibility for that choice?
It's that ethical line question again. Where do you draw it?
Yeah. And that's where the tension really lies, isn't it? You have these strong moral feelings about certain clients.
Absolutely. Understandable feelings.
But then you have this principle of universal access to counsel, which is designed to protect the whole system, even for the unpopular or the accused.
Because the fear is, if you start targeting lawyers based on who they represent,
Or their perceived political leanings.
it sets a really dangerous precedent.
Right. And the initial voice in the source, the one expressing satisfaction, they double down, saying basically zero sympathy for Covington in this specific instance and hoping Trump, quote, tramples them.
Wow, okay. Very strong language.
But the counter-argument immediately broadens the scope again. Think about the wider implications for free speech.
How so?
The source draws a kind of parallel to history, times when governments controlled information and expression. The point being, even if you hate who Covington represents,
Their freedom to represent them is tied up with everyone's freedom to speak and access the legal system.
that's the argument. Protecting their right protects yours, essentially.
And it's crucial to note, right, that the stated reason for Trump's orders, according to the source,
Yeah, good point. It isn't framed as a moral objection to the clients.
it's framed as being because they helped his political foes, like Jack Smith or the DNC.
Exactly, which makes it look much more like political retaliation rather than some principled stand on legal ethics.
Which circles back to that core worry about the precedent, doesn't it?
It really does. The warning from the source is crystal clear. Today it's the Republicans, tomorrow it's the Democrats.
Meaning, if one side uses government power to punish law firms for representing opponents,
What stops the next administration from doing the exact same thing to their perceived enemies? You start eroding those protections.
it really highlights how fragile these things can be and why that separation between political power and the independent legal system is so critical.
Yeah. Even if you have, personally, really strong negative feelings about a particular law firm or its clients, the source argues you have to consider the potential long-term damage to the whole system if these kinds of actions become normalized.
A very sobering thought.
So, okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, we've really looked at two major areas highlighted in the source material.
Yeah, quite distinct, but maybe connected in terms of political climate.
Right. First, those internal dynamics that perceive disarray within the Democratic Party. The questions about leadership, strategy effectiveness.
Can they find a unified vision? Who's really in charge? Are the current tactics working? Those seem to be the key questions lingering from that part.
Definitely. And second, we dug into the implications of Trump's actions, targeting these specific law firms linked to his opponents.
And there, it's that real tension, that balancing act between, maybe holding powerful firms accountable in some way versus protecting fundamental rights and the rule of law itself.
Exactly. Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener.
Okay.
Just consider this. What are the long-term consequences for the health of our whole political system when a major party seems to be struggling so much with internal unity and finding direction?
And on the other side, what does this suggest when actions are taken, politically motivated or not, that could potentially chill legal representation for certain groups or individuals?
Yeah. What does all this tell you about the current state of American politics and maybe more importantly, where things might be heading? Something to think about.